Welcome to another edition of the Giants Huddle podcast, brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the New York Giants. I am John Schmeelk, coming to you from the Giants podcast studio, presented by Hackensack Meridian Health. Keep getting better. With free agency kind of get going this week, there's a lot in flux the first few days during that legal negotiating period when deals aren't announced, they're not signed, they're not official. So with so many things happening so fast, I didn't think it made sense to really dive into free agency because things can quickly become old news and become contradictory if the facts on the ground change. So I decided to do something a little bit different today. We're going to welcome in Cody Alexander from matchquarters.com. He's done a really deep dive look at Dennard Wilson, what he does on defense, what he did on defense with the Titans, and we're going to dive into that. And now we welcome in our guest. He is Cody Alexander, matchquarters.com, the Let's Talk Ball podcast. Friend of the program, you joined us a couple years ago, Cody. How are you, man? It's good to talk to you, and how you been?
Yeah, doing great. Just I have the best job in the world, man. I watch football and talk about football all day long.
Yeah, we're very lucky, no doubt about it. You did a really big breakdown on matchquarters.com. It could be linked on your Twitter feed at _coach_A. You can find it on there, folks, about Dennard Wilson. So before we start getting into details, give me your 20,000-foot view of what Dennard Wilson's defense was with the Titans and what Giants should expect.
He came into the season wanting to run a Ravens. He called it Ravens light defense. So it's a base 3-4. Obviously, you're going to play a lot of nickel. Where his departure really from McDonald is that he wanted to run a lot of press quarters. So he wanted corners that could press. That's why they went and got L'Jarius Sneed from the Chiefs. He wanted to have guys that could really kind of hold down on the outside on their own. He was going to run a bunch of these. You know, the thing with the Ravens system is that they have a ton of simulated pressures, meaning that they're going to show a bunch of different looks, but only rush 4. And on the back end of that, he wanted to have a lot of coverage rotation. That's kind of been the trend the past couple of years of we really want to have a bunch of coverage disguises. So what we look pre-snap is not what we're going to look post-snap, kind of taking that onus away from the OC and putting it on the quarterback. That's what he came into the season really wanting to do. What ended up happening, though, is that they really didn't have any linebackers. The corner situation there kind of fell off of a cliff. McCreary got traded. Sneed was constantly hurt all year. The other corner, it was kind of a revolving door of players. And so what ended up happening is that he pivoted more to they were going to play kind of nickel, but they were going to really rely on Simmons and Sweat inside. So it became, he called it a two-man front, essentially with two edges. You have these big dudes inside that kind of clean everything up and then simplifying the coverages on the back end. I think that was the big thing. So that's what he wanted to do coming into this year, but kind of roster-wise, he had to really simplify and really play just kind of a static defense, if that makes sense.
No, it does. All right, so let's start with the coverage part of this, because I think this is kind of what his bread and butter is, what his expertise is, right? So his first year with Tennessee, I know you didn't look at that tape. He started out playing a lot of man, and he quickly saw that his guys couldn't handle that, and he went away from it. And he went to a lot of zone. Last year, you talked about what he did a lot of, and I guess for Giant fans, while it's quarters, while it's zone, to them, it might look like a lot of man principles, right, in terms of how tight these guys are playing, how close they are. So when you say that type of scheme, what will it look like when Giant fans are watching it? Even they might not know the technical definition of exactly the type of coverages that he's running.
Yeah, so he plays a very match-heavy zone, and match is just a fancy word for man with rules, right? It's a coach speak term that is essentially saying man with rules, and those rules are going to be we're keying a certain receiver. If he comes into my zone, I'm now going to switch it. Now I'm going to get real sticky on him, where I think the safeties are going to play more of a vision concept. They're going to be the ones that you can kind of tell, oh, okay, they're in his zone scheme. He's either, closing the post, getting to the middle of the field and a classic cover 3, or in their quarters or cover 2 looks, they're staying on the hash or getting to the deep half. So those things will look similar. But in terms of underneath coverage, is primarily at the nickel and the corner spots, he's really going to want them to lock on to receivers. He's going to want the DBs in the corners guarding receivers. He's going to want the safeties and the linebackers guarding tight ends and running backs. And that's really what he wants. Now, he wanted big physical corners that could press. That's something that he wanted with the Titans. I don't think that that's necessarily going to change when he comes with the Giants, because he wants guys that can kind of really be sticky at the point of attack on the line of scrimmage.
And you talk about coverage rotations. When I watched some of his stuff, it looked like pre-snap, he tried to show, all right, I got two safeties high. But then post-snap, all right, well, this guy's coming down low. This guy's staying deep. And really from play to play, what those two safeties were doing were very different, even though pre-snap, it might have looked like that kind of too high shell coverage.
Exactly. And that is, again, that is pretty much where we are in the meta of the NFL, is that everything is trying to be played from a too high shell. You're going to start seeing more and more. So if you're watching on TV and they actually show the safeties, you're going to see more and more of these static shells where these guys are actually on the same plane. Typically, you're hearing more and more offensive coordinators talk about contours, which is basically, I'm trying to look at the level of the safety. I'm trying to look at the width of the nickel. Is he outside leverage? Is he inside leverage? Because I'm trying to get a key of where the drop is going to be, because it's really hard to tell a quarterback, hey, read the corner during the play. And like, typically you're not going to do it. And then with the match rules, it makes it really difficult. So again, the corner can lie to you what the coverage is, because you can run cover 3 and lock the backside X. So you can play like a 3 lock scheme. You can run quarters and lock the corners in kind of like a 4 lock scheme. So what defenses now are really trying to do is essentially, we're going to line our safeties up at 12. They're going to be on the same plane. And then post snap, we're going to try and keep that depth as long as possible. But to your point, you're going to have a down safety and what I call a cover safety or a post safety, where a guy that's going to be high in the zone and a guy that's going to be low and someone who's trying to work near the box.
And that's how you try to eliminate that middle of the field intermediate area, right? By kind of getting that safety into that middle of the field spot.
Exactly. And so the misnomer about quarters in particular is that it is a middle of the field open coverage. And so they think of it like, a lot of fans think of it like cover 2, where it looks like the dividing of the Red Sea, right? The parting of the Red Sea. Both safeties are working in a deep half. There's nobody in the post. That's why you get Tampa, where you're trying to run the mic through the middle of the field, or whoever you deem as a middle run through. Quarters is different. These are vision halves, basically hash safeties. And so even though the hashes in the NFL are compressed, those guys really are trying to just live there. And then depending on the routes that they get, this is where the rules come in. And depending on the routes that they get, you have the closed post mechanics. And so one of the things in modern defense that has really, which I love, has really come into play, is that you have quarters rules in cover 3 to kind of get into those problems that you have of where with the typical, cover 3, where we're getting killed on the deep crosses. And then in quarters, you have to have cover 3 mechanics where I can close the post. And so those marriages of coverage are primarily from a weak rotation, so away from the nickel or away from the passing string, has really muddied everything up. And really, this is kind of the Fangio gift to defense that started in 2020 that people have either added to their systems or have really tried to repurpose themselves.
And it's funny, what I'll say to fans, you can have access to this through NFL Plus if you want to go and watch some of the coverages and some of the old 22. If you're watching this stuff on tape and you have to rewind it 3 or 4 times to figure out exactly what the coverage is based on what they're doing post versus pre-snap, that probably means the defensive coordinator is doing a good job. If you can immediately say, all right, that's cover 3. All right, that's cover 2. That means, you know what? If you can figure it out quickly, you're not very good at this. I'm not very good at this. The pros are going to know what you're in about 2.5 milliseconds.
Exactly. And it's actually like, because anybody that knows me or has followed me, like I'm like a coverage first guy anyway. Like that's kind of where I look. Been a DB coach forever. I love coverages. I study it all the time. There's definitely like the way that we're getting to how teams are starting to teach. Like I'm even on some of these, the way, especially the backside or playing vision and cross keen safety. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff that guys are doing now that I even have to like rewind, or I'll get wrong and I'll have somebody like DM me and be like, hey, this is actually this. And I was like, no way. And then I go back and I'm like, okay, I see it now. Now that you put the perspective in it, like, okay, I see that hash safety is really leaning to the post and that vision safety on the backside because it's weak rotation cover 3. It looks like quarters, but it's not. So that's what I really mean by the marriage of the rules. And so if I'm being tricked, as somebody that watches a volume of film and kind of really understands at an intimate level how these coverages are taught, then you know for sure that these offenses are really, really struggling to figure that out. And that's exactly what these defenses want to do.
Yeah, and just getting to the concept of quarters and how they're running it. I'll see some of these defenses sometimes. It looks like they're playing zone on one side of the field and man on the other. And I'm like, I know that's not a coverage because that you cannot play defense that way. But the way some of these quarters coverages are designed, that's what it can look like. And good luck if you're a quarterback, running a play action fake and you snap your head around and the defense just moved. How the heck are you supposed to know what the heck's going on?
No, and that's exactly correct. So we've seen this over and over again. In fact, the half field match and zone stuff has been around for a long time, but I think teams are starting to repurpose and understand, like, hey, depending on the formation, like if we get 3 receivers together in a tight bind, hey, we want to zone that. Hey, we want to be a man on that side. I think where we're really starting to see is that coaches are now able to really holistically coach that to where people know, hey, I'm on the zone side. I can't let it go back to the man side. So being able to carry stuff like that. I think the Bills really, even though, McDermott got fired this year, what they were doing on defense in their cover 2 scheme of playing essentially 2 man to one side and then zone cover 2 to the other and marrying that and really getting into that. They used to just do it against the Dolphins, and then they started doing it against everybody, and it really started confusing. So even within, hey, I know that what this coverage is, you're like, wait a second, one side's playing like a man, the other side's playing that. I think the one thing, it's so interesting because I essentially put the nail in the coffin last year for 2 man. I was like, oh, it's a dead coverage. Nobody's using it anymore, blah, blah. Fast forward to this year, more teams are using it, but they're using zone principles with their safety. So you're getting the poach safety, meaning that he's basically a backstop for any deep crosser coming from the front side with a deep safety to the other side. So all of these Fangio adjacent coverages of where you're moving the cover 2 rotational stuff, they're using that in 2 man. The Lions are a great example of using different concepts within it. And then everybody started stealing that. So we're in a deal now where it's really, how can you as a defensive coordinator, and this is where Dennard Wilson comes in because he was under McDonald, which was part of kind of the scheme revamp within the Ravens system of how can we really focus more on techniques so that we can, McDonald calls it a modular defense. I call it like interchangeable parts. So imagine having all these different interchangeable parts that are these specific techniques that we can create, Frankenstein defenses where it's complex for the offense, but defensively, I'm not teaching the players anything new. We're just mixing and matching for what we need. So you can almost look completely different every week without reinventing the wheel.
Huddle up, get in here. If you're lined up here, you gotta go over the middle with it to score.
Right. How do we make that happen?
I don't know, but Citizens does. Make sense of your money with Citizens, official bank of Eli Manning.
Giants Huddle Podcast is brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants. From game day celebrations to your everyday financial needs, Big Blue fans get the most out of every moment with Citizens. Learn more at citizensbank.com/Giants. The individual responsibilities aren't complicated, but the way it looks together can look extremely complicated. So you're keeping it simple for the individual. All right, you're playing inside technique here, you're playing trail tech, whatever the case might be. They've done that before in a bunch of different coverages. But the way the coaches are putting it together keeps it simple for the player, but more complicated for the offense because as a group, it looks confusing, correct?
Exactly. So again, it goes back to, look, there are certain non-negotiables within football. It doesn't even matter. So if you're a high school coach listening to this, you're probably about to shake your head like, yeah, of course. It's always about the fundamentals, right? And I think a lot of people at the lower levels, they look at the NFL and it's like, oh, well, you have all these aliens up there. Like you can do whatever you want. But I think what we really saw in 2026 was a back to basics approach where I'm just more and more as I'm getting deeper and deeper into my research as I'm going, because I typically go from worst to first in the offseason. I'm just the bottom level of teams is like we came in wanting to do this and it was really super complex. But at the end of the day, we were like, hey, no, this isn't working. We need to get back to basics. So, and I think overall, Seattle's a great example of it. You talked to Mike McDonald. It's all about fundamentals. It's all about techniques and then being able to build a defense. So to your point, these techniques are non-negotiable techniques, day one install techniques that at every level football are playing. What you're doing is you're repurposing them and mixing and matching them to get the matchup you want or to make the offense left-handed.
And just having your leverage right becomes essential, because if you mess 100%. That up, you're going to have a free runner going across the field with the other side of the field playing the man principles, and then you're going to be finished. So I'm with you. That makes a lot of sense. All right. Let's get the personnel here. The Giants, you talked about it. He wants to have big corners to be able to press, right? Well, the Giants have Paulson Adebo, so I think they feel pretty good about that on one side, right? He's that big corner that's able to press. The other side, Cordell Flott's a free agent. Deonte Banks has not had a very good first 3 years here. They're trying to figure that out. So that's something you have to figure out. Anything else in that outside corner spot besides being big and be able to press that you think the Giants might prioritize as they try to figure out who that second outside corner is?
I really think that's what it is. I mean, I think he wants some height and length there too. I mean, look, that you talk to any corners coach, they're going to want somebody that's 6'2" or heavier, that doesn't or bigger. That doesn't necessarily always translate to what you get. But I think for him, that's his whole point is like, we really want to disrupt at the line of scrimmage. I need long levered guys. I need guys that can basically hit and run. I can press or bump and run, things like that. Whereas, you start moving to different positions, those guys in particular have to really be able to be sticky at the line of scrimmage.
Okay. The nickel spot. They had Roger McCreary in Tennessee, right? He's a very unique, smaller, short arm type of guy. You go back to his time with the Ravens, though. All right, well, Kyle Hamilton's playing the slot. He's gigantic. In his ideal world, what does his slot player look like? Is it more of a 3 safety look? Does he want that smaller slot guy that can cover and mirror? What is he looking at from that kind of that slot star position that so many teams are using now?
Right. It used to be, and I mean, I think people are going to have to start getting adjusted to this. It's really funny. Bucky Brooks wrote an article in 2014 about how the big nickel is back. And here we are. It's just so funny because I kind of wrote about the big nickel last year as like, hey, this is a trend coming into into 2025. Here we are 10 years plus later, and now the cycle's back. And I think to your point, if you're talking to all these guys, it's like, look, we want to stay in nickel. And the best defenses are able to stay in nickel, and they have a guy that's around 200 plus pounds that can stay in when you have 12 personnel. And so I think for fans and really anybody that's kind of attached to the league, you're going to have to start getting off of to stay in the division. Christian Parker talked about how the nickel to him is really a first round draft pick kind of guy. Like it has to be, he's essentially a starter for you. And if you can live in nickel, like the Seahawks were able to do, or the Houston Texans were able to do, you're now kind of eliminating that 12 personnel and 13 personnel kind of passing game, which is really, let's be honest, the offenses are trying to cosplay as a running offense when they're really just trying to get into 12 personnel, but run 11 personnel schemes. So like their schemes that they have, it's the inverse of the Rams, right? Remember the Rams when McVay hit, it was all about 11 personnel, but we're really running 12 personnel runs, right? Or we're really in 21 personnel, even though we've got 3 receivers on. It's kind of the inverse of that. Because offenses want you to get in base. They want you to have 2 edges on there. They want you to have 2 inside linebackers, because what happens in base is you essentially have to really show your cards. It's really hard to do a bunch of rotations out of that or coverage ability out of that. And so these tight ends now have become kind of pass catching first guys. And so it really messes with you. So that, to me, I think, look, I really like Drew Phillips, but at 180 pounds, it's going to be really difficult to just stay on the field all the time when teams get into 21 and 12, when every defensive coordinator in the NFL will tell you, I want to be in nickel as much as possible.
No, I think that makes sense. So when it comes to the safety position with the Giants, they have 2 fairly well-sized guys. Javon Holland, who's done this a long time. He can do a little bit of everything. Tyler Nubin in college showed the ability to be a ball hawk guy. Hasn't quite shown up yet in the pros, but he's been good around the line of scrimmage with his length. I assume, given the type of scheme you want with those safeties doing different things, they need to be fairly interchangeable, right? Where both guys can come down, both guys can play the post. And that way you probably lend a little bit more indecision to the offense if you don't know which safety is going to do which role.
Right. A lot of times you will have some of these guys would love to have a left and a right safety. Essentially, you just have two mirrors of each other. Typically, that's not going to happen. Normally, you're going to have like a down safety who is going to be the guy that, hey, anytime we rotate, we want to bring you down near the box. You're the guy that's going to play near the box, kind of that enforcer, that apex defender that you see. I think in a perfect world, though, you want to be able to have that. I think, too, if teams are starting to look at, hey, do we want to get a corner body or do we want to get a safety body? Unless that corner is Cooper DeJean and is 6'2", 205, 206, it's going to be really difficult for you to kind of sit there and say, okay, well, that's kind of going to be our nickel spot. I think what the teams are looking for is interchangeability at safety, but also if we have a guy that can play near the box, I'm going to put him in the box. And I think we see this with the Ravens. You saw this with Minkah Fitzpatrick with the Dolphins. You see this, all these other safeties like Derwin James. The Chargers really just want him to live near the box as much as possible. So you kind of go down the list of guys that are really good near the box. And then they're like, well, we might as well just use him as nickel. So going into the offseason, you should be able to tell what Wilson really thinks about kind of in that first wave of free agency, and then what you do in the draft. So by the time you leave the draft, you'll have an idea of like who your nickel is probably going to be.
So you would not be shocked then, even with Nubin and Holland here, if the Giants at some point do add a third player in that profile that then you can use as your quote unquote nickel box guy or as one of the two deep guys in that, pre-snap shell.
Yeah, and I would even go one step further. You already have a proven nickel in Drew Phillips. And so now what that expands it into, and what a lot of people don't talk about, is the ability to play dime. And so now I have a dime back who we can use as a big nickel if we're playing a spread team, which there are a few of them in the league that really want to play a ton of 11 personnel. We can just go ahead and play a regular nickel. We have a big nickel, and now we have a dime set. And that safety room is what gives you the flexibility. It's not the corner room that gives you that flexibility. So I think if you look at, it's so funny talking to defensive coordinators last year. I mean, almost all of them are like, man, if the more dime we can play, the better we're going to be. But we have to have that ability to do that, because I think everybody knows, again, you're not paying quarterbacks $50-60 million to turn around and hand the ball off to a $9 million, $8 million running back. That's just the efficiency in there. And the owners are not going to be happy with you either.
And we'll get to the defensive front, because I do think this changes your needs on the front if you're going to try to play light in the back end, right? But let's go to linebacker first, because if you're going to play a lot of dime or even a lot of nickel, that middle linebackers do a lot of work, especially in the run game, right? So what does that player need to look like? Are we looking at more than a thumper, or is it still essential for that guy to be able to drop, take up space, pattern read, and play that role? What's the ideal middle linebacker look like in this type of scheme?
In this scheme, I think they really want a guy that can play in the middle of the box. I think that you're going to see that will linebacker spot. It needs to be the coverage guy. It needs to be able to get into that vertical hook, needs to be able to drop and run. I think in the modern NFL right now, I think the box backer, the guy that can play in the A-gap can still survive, but that will linebacker is really what's going to answer that problem for you. Is if we feel like we can use him as an edge rusher and drop him down to create kind of a five-man front and really define the A-gap for that linebacker, or if we can use him as the coverage piece, that we can keep that kind of Mike backer, that box backer low or on the running back, and then we can drop that will really deep into coverage and get him out of the box. I think, again, that unlocks your defense. So you have to have at least one of the guys with some sort of hybrid ability, whether that's through the edge rush to change the math up front, or in coverage where he's really your coverage linebacker, can play to a tight end and understand zone coverage and has the ability to really drop deep to kind of unlock your safeties.
So you need one thumper and one guy that can operate well in space.
Yes,
What you're telling me.
Exactly. And I think really again, it goes back to the safety problem, right? It's like, look, we would love for them to be, the Spider-Man meme and they point at each other and they both look the exact same. We would love that then we're interchangeable. We only play left and right. The offense can never figure out what we're doing. Linebacker wise, I think you have to be realistic. It's going to be very, very hard. You don't want two coverage linebackers because then you're not thick through the middle. You don't want to have two thumpers because then you can't run, and you essentially have told them we can't live in base, or even in nickel, we're going to be in a world of hurt because our DBs are the only ones that can cover. So you need to have at least realistically a thumper and then a coverage guy.
So you really start at the point where your defense is still basically a weak link philosophy, right? When the opposing offense looks at it, if they find a weakness, even if it's one linebacker that can't cover or two, they're going to find that weakness and try to exploit it. So you have to make sure that you have as few weak points as possible, basically.
Exactly. The NFL is still, and I think really any professional sport is all about matchups, and the NFL is in, I call it and I've written about this before, it's in the space era, which the spread won, right? That these offenses now know how to attack space and create space and use your rules against you to create that space. That's why we see motion so much and shifts and to try and create leverage. You mentioned leverage before. And so that's where we are. And so because of that, that's where defense is now. How can we constrain space, and where is our weak link? And then how can we protect that weak link? And the less weak links you have, obviously, the better off you're going to be.
If you want to know how to manage 2 minutes of crunch time football, I'm your man. But if you're wondering about a long-term financial plan, you should talk to Citizens. Hey, I can also talk lawn care.
I'd like to learn about a mowing routine.
Yes, I knew I could help. Make sense of your money with Citizens.
It makes total sense. All right. You started in your first answer talking about how they kind of, Dennard Wilson turned it into a two-man front almost with a couple of stand-up edges, and then you have the two big guys in the middle. What does this defensive front look like? How does it operate? Or you look at it, generally you want to play a 4-2-5, right? Generally speaking, if you want to, be a nickel most of the time, right? So what does that front look like? Does it look two down defensive tackles with two stand-up ends? Are you going to have 4 men down? What will this look like in non-big personnel on offense situations?
Well, I think you have the edges in Abdul Carter and Brian Burns that kind of can feed into that simulated pressure mentality that he wants, where one guy's is the aggressor, one guy's the protector, right? I've got one guy dropping, I've got one guy blitzing. If we want to really send both of them, that just adds pressure to the offense. We can live in a 4 down with our pass rush and really kind of change the math on the coverage side. Because again, if you can win with 4, you're now changing the math for the coverage ability, which again, you already have 7 guys, and it's simple math, right? Like if I can win with 4, then I'm beating one of your linemen on a consistent basis, which is going to force you to bring in a tight end. Well, okay, there's only 5 eligible receivers. If you have to bring in a tight end, or we have to leave the back, now there's only 4 receivers that are going out. If I can hold 7, that means I can double 2 guys now. So it's like it changes the math when you can do that. And I really think another guy too, like having a Brian Burns, who we've seen multiple times being pulled back into a linebacker position, it feeds into that modular defense that you have with that Ravens system that can give you different looks, confuse the offense, but we're really not changing anything structurally what we're doing on defense, and nobody's being confused. I think Abdul Carter's athletic. Again, I don't know if I would necessarily drop him into coverage as much, but you have that ability these guys are athletic to at least take the back out of the backfield, which I think for the most part within the system, that's really what they're trying to do. So you have some kind of ability to mix and match guys. And again, you have one of the best nose guards in the entire league in Dexter Lawrence. So that also too, you don't have, he had Sweat with the Titans. Now he's got Dexter Lawrence, who you could argue is probably a little bit better. So to me, I think the roadmap is already there.
So, and then for the tackles, you're going to have one playing like the one shade, and then you're going to have the 3 tech.
Yeah, exactly. And 2, you can, in passing downs, I think that you'll see, Thibodeau, somebody who has some size that you can throw inside, and which we've seen the Giants. This is not the first time the Giants have done something like that, that you can throw inside. So I think you really want to have somebody that's requiring 2 offensive linemen, because if that's the case now, and again, Lawrence can beat a double team. So now what we're doing is creating one-on-ones without sending a blitzer. So what you see now is when we do send a blitz, it's very targeted. It's a precision strike and not necessarily a volume strike of where we're just going to try and overload one side and hopefully we get there. If I can get those one-on-ones, now we're really cooking, because I feel good about my edges. I feel really good about Dexter Lawrence even taking on a double team. That 3 technique, it's like, look, all you got to do is win a couple. It's kind of like baseball. Just have a good batting average against the guard. And if you do that, then we're going to be in some serious business.
So Dennard Wilson, his history is interesting, and this is where we'll kind of wrap this thing up. He coached under Greg Williams. He coached under Todd Bowles. 2 guys that brought the heat all the time. No one blitzed more than those 2 guys. But when he's gotten the reins, he hasn't blitzed all that often. But talking to people around the league, a lot of people have said to me over the last month or so that we feel like if he had his druthers, he would bring pressure more than he did. And he felt like the issues in the secondary prohibited some of that aggressiveness when he was in Tennessee. Is that your read on it? Do you think his blitz numbers might go up a little bit? Or is it still going to be more that simulated pressure? It looks like it, but you're still only sending 4.
I agree with that statement and kind of where everybody was, and he really relayed that too in a lot of his press conferences throughout the year. Was just kind of like, look, I have an immature secondary. I have linebackers that don't have really good instincts, and so either I have to keep things simple up front so they know exactly where to fit, or I have to blitz them into their gap. And that's the thing that you need to understand, and really any defensive coordinator that tells you blitz to answer problems, or hey, we're having trouble, let's blitz out of it, that's typically not the way to go. That's run away from a defense coordinator like that. Blitzing should be a tool, and I think we see that within the NFL, where really blitz rates are higher, but we're really only seeing them still less than a third of all the plays. So even though we're getting that amplified blitz, I think people understand, hey, forcing the issue, especially on early downs, to really accelerate the clock of the quarterback, because a lot of these are play action passes. Play action passes take a little bit longer to develop. Blitzing accelerates that clock. So I think that's really where the philosophy and the trends have been, is on early downs. I think overall most coaches would like to see kind of like around that between kind of 27 to 30% is probably the sweet spot in blitzing. And that to me, I think would be that. And having, like you mentioned, Williams and Bowles, he knows how to blitz. He just not doing it because that secondary with Tennessee was just not good.
I think that makes sense. All right, let's just wrap up with this before we say goodbye. It seems to me, even though to your point, a lot of this comes down to fundamental techniques and stuff like that in terms of the individual player. But it seems like you're going to have some high IQ players on defense to properly execute this, to understand your responsibilities, always get them right, understanding where you have to be, and working in conjunction with your teammates. So as they try to build this defense out, and I think a lot of the pieces are in place already, how important is getting smart, intelligent, that have players that have good instincts, that can execute this properly? Because to your point, it didn't seem like he had those pieces in Tennessee, which limited what he could do.
Well, it's a force multiplier, and you're going to start hearing that term a lot in terms of, I've heard this term a ton already during the offseason, just we want a force multiplier. So whether that is they can do multiple things for us, they can play multiple positions for us, or and win, or they're so intelligent that we can get them and we can do kind of like stuff on stuff, right? Like, hey, we can get to that. Because I think at the end of the day, and really what he wanted to do at the beginning of the year with the Titans was, we want to give those confusing looks. We want to kind of rotate guys. I want certain players to fit in certain spots, but we have to be able to hide our intentions. So even though they're ending in the same spot, it looks different all the time. That it can only be done when you have guys that are high level IQ. And I would just argue too, as the NFL is shifting more towards zone, it's going to be harder and harder, especially in the secondary, for guys to just be kind of like a thoroughbred, right? Like where, hey, we're putting blinders on you. I just need you to get that guy and run wherever he goes. I think now and really motions have changed that. Offensive structure, get stacks, bunches. We're just not, offenses too are not lining up in static alignments anymore. You have to communicate. If somebody goes across the field, am I going with him? If we're in zone, that changes my responsibility. If we're in man, am I pushing a guy over? I may be going from a simple, I've got that guy, to now me and this other guy are reading the stack. So, yeah, I agree with you. You cannot anymore just kind of be the 80s movies killed it for a lot of people. You can't just be the dumb jock anymore and just go out there and be like, slam the door shut, right? Or I got that guy. It really is now a kind of a thinking man's game. And that's why I love defense, because it's reactionary. It's about leverage. It's about matchups. And players now have to reflect that.
All right, and then I'm going to do my old man get off my lawn moment, yell at the clouds moment here. Nothing drives me more nuts watching a lot of these defenses and these guys playing zone when they really do think their job is to just stand in an area, and if people come to them, then they cover it. If I see one more guy stop in a zone and the defender just looks at him instead of actually going to cover the guy, I'm going to lose my damn mind. I don't know how coaches deal with it. I don't know if that's a coaching thing, a player thing, but too often guys are just sitting in zones, watching guys open in their zone and like, well, I'm in my right spot, but they don't actually cover the player. It drives me absolutely bananas. I can't take it.
No, I look, I'm a zone match guy at heart, and I agree with you. Some of the vision stuff I think is good for the deeper parts, the deeper coverages, but when you are underneath, you need to at least relate to a man and close off the space. The offense, look, quarterbacks are too good now.
Yeah.
That when they don't have pressure, we saw this too. I think McDonald hit on it on some of the pressures and stuff that he it's like, look, you're avoiding a zone. Stafford killed them, and he would talk about it with that. Is Stafford knew exactly where those blitzes, where the five-man pressure was coming from, and he knew exactly where to hit that spot. And I think in the NFL, you have to be really, really targeted about not only when you throw the ball, but how are you also going to play that? You need to match up. You don't need to cover necessarily grass, especially underneath. You can play vision over top because you've got that time and space to kind of figure that out. But underneath, I agree with you. You need to match up the man in your zone.
Yeah, absolutely right. And then the guys that can't figure out how to adjust on their zone defense based on where the first down marker is.
Yes.
Guys, it's third and 6. Why are you dropping 8 yards deep? I don't understand.
Yeah. You've got your post safety 20 yards deep, and it's 3rd and 3. Yeah, that's usually not going to end very well. I agree with you. Yeah, that always wears me out too.
Oh, it absolutely does. Cody, anything we missed that you think fans should know about this defense and Dennard Wilson?
I'll just say this. I'll end with this. I think if Harbaugh could do it over again, I think he would have done something to keep Dennard Wilson in Baltimore. I thought it was very odd that he let not only him, but Anthony Weaver walk. And especially knowing that you're the best player on defense is in the secondary. I think that's one of the reasons why when he got the Giants job, he went and got Dennard Wilson. He wanted to make sure that he had a secondary guy correct, because if you go and you look at some of the problems with the Ravens, it was a lot of times in that back end minus Hamilton. So I think you got a good one, and I'm pretty excited to watch the Giants defense this year.
Yeah, so are we. Tell us one more time, Cody, where to find all your great work.
Everything is at matchquarters.com. If you go there and you're interested in defense at all, I do deep dives every single week. I've got a bunch of content out. And then Let's Talk Ball. It's a football show that talks about football. That's why I do it, so that you can find it there too.
I love it, man. Thanks so much for the time, and keep up the great work this offseason. I'll be reading.
Appreciate it.
We thank Cody Alexander from matchquarters.com for joining us. Great stuff out of him. Really instructive in terms of what Dennard Wilson might bring to the Giants defense and maybe impact what they do in free agency. For Corey, I'm John Schmeelk. That's Big Blue Kickoff Live, presented by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants. Coming to you from the Giants podcast studio, brought to you by Hackensack Meridian Health. Keep getting better. We'll see you next time, everybody. Enjoy free agency.